There's Matt Koch, Speed Cafe F1 editor here, previewing the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, which starts on Friday, slightly earlier times this weekend, which is handy for those of us on the East Coast. Just 9 o'clock race start, which is a couple of hours earlier than it's been in recent weeks. And it's an interesting race weekend to go into. The first of a back-to-back doubleheader with Singapore and a couple of races that, in theory, shouldn't suit Red Bull. Red Bull is a car that has had its foibles in recent races and has gone backwards compared to some of its rivals, McLaren in particular, but Ferrari and Mercedes as well. And it doesn't suit bumps, it doesn't ride curbs well, and they're the sorts of things that around street circuits like in Baku and Singapore in a week's time will be all important. So look for Red Bull this weekend. It's a really important round in their championship quest. They're just 8 points clear of McLaren in the Constructors' Championship, and Max Verstappen is only 62 ahead of Lando Norris. That's a little bit further in the driver's standings, but Lando Norris is still mathematically very much in contention. And that raises an interesting question for McLaren. Does it throw its support behind Lando Norris at the expense of Oscar Piastri, or does it allow its drivers to continue racing, maintaining that papaya rules system that it introduced or became prevalent in the Italian Grand Prix? It's a little bit of a strange name, but basically don't crash into each other is what it means. Oscar Piastri has beaten Lando Norris in 3 of the last 4 races. To ask him to move aside is therefore a big ask, but with 62 points between Norris and Max Verstappen, it's kind of the point in time where decisions need to be made. There's just 8 races remaining, including this weekend's Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Time is starting to run out. Norris needs to make some big inroads on Verstappen if he's really to drive home that advantage and give himself a good opportunity when we get to the Americas and then beyond that, the Middle East, Qatar and Abu Dhabi to round the season out. So those inroads need to be really made now as we head to events when we know the Red Bull, in theory, shouldn't be as strong as it has been at other events. But let's not rule out Ferrari as well. They were resurgent in the Italian Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc won. Really good use of strategy there. Probably wasn't the fastest car, but they made use of the tools at their advantage. They were able to trip McLaren up. They went for a 2-stop strategy. Ferrari went for the 1, and that gave Leclerc the advantage. They rolled the dice, and they got the returns on that. How competitive that will be at a completely different circuit. Monza, a very, very high-speed circuit. Azerbaijan, not much in the way of high-speed content. There's some long straights, of course, but in terms of the corners, they're all sort of second, third gear, left, right-handers, 90-degree sort of things. It's a very traditional street circuit for the most part, apart from that long front straight that really does compromise teams in setup. So that will be interesting. High temperatures expected in Azerbaijan, and that generally doesn't favour Mercedes as well. So it'll be interesting to see where they stack up compared to McLaren and Ferrari and Red Bull. Red Bull going into this one on a good weekend, given the nature of the circuit and their weaknesses in the car, you'd suggest they're probably going to be best third team, maybe fourth team if they're having a particularly off weekend, but who knows? The competition is so tight at the moment. McLaren has to go in as favourites, and given their relative performance, Oscar Piastri, in my opinion, is the favourite heading in to the weekend. Lando Norris will be there or thereabouts. It'll be interesting to see what conversations have been had there since the Italian Grand Prix, given the championships that are on the line. I fully expect McLaren to be leading the Constructors' Championship by the time we get to Singapore on the other side of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And then there's, of course, other stories down the grid as well. RB has got a new flaw that it introduced in the Italian Grand Prix. It didn't really work for Yuki Tsunoda. He was the only one of the 2 drivers there to have it. Daniel Ricciardo will have a version of that or an instance of that part this weekend. He'll try it and then decide whether it makes the car better or not. At this point, the indication is that maybe it's moved the balance around and not in a positive respect. It might have added load, but it's moved the balance to the point where the car is just actually a little bit worse, much like it did in Spain. And that's going to be a real concern if that is the case, because that points to some deep-seated correlation issues. We know in Spain they took a couple of races to understand what went wrong there. So I'd be curious to see what the flaw does in Azerbaijan, a very different circuit. Daniel Ricciardo, a very much more experienced driver, he suggests maybe it's just the setup window needs to be adjusted and accounted for to address the balance. But we'll see what happens in Azerbaijan. And of course, it's a big weekend for Daniel Ricciardo this weekend, and Spain. Liam Lawson is knocking on the door. September 15, I'm told, is the date for his option at Red Bull. That's the Sunday of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. A decision on his future, if it hasn't been made, will be made in the very, very near future. And that could spell the end of Daniel Ricciardo's career. I suspect that he'll stay at RB until the end of the year. That's my read on the situation. But Liam Lawson is knocking on the door. What happens to Sergio Perez, the most successful driver in Azerbaijan Grand Prix history? He's the only driver to have won there more than once. His future still hangs in the balance. These two next races, Singapore and Azerbaijan, are critical to his future as well. So a big weekend coming up. As I say, a little bit earlier for all of us here in Australia, a couple of hours earlier than it has been in recent weeks. So do make sure you check your times. It's a 9 o'clock race start if you're on the East Coast. That's 8:30 over in Adelaide, and a little bit earlier again if you're in Perth. High temperatures, 4 teams that could realistically go in and win this. An outsider for Red Bull, which is a strange thing to say, but it's going to be an exciting weekend. Do stick around on Speed Cafe for all the F1 news across the weekend. And beyond that, we'll catch you for Singapore.